DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as DreAllDay, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is, we are on part 2 of our ongoing, what will be an ongoing 4-part series, which is why Western society is collapsing. I already gave you the intro to this in part 1 yesterday. If you didn't get it, make sure you go check part 1 so you have a frame for where this is coming from, and so that you get the full context of what I'm talking about here, because every piece is going to connect to the next piece. So make sure you check the previous episode right here. That said, let's just pick up right where we left off, which is picking up on point number 4. Again, we are on part 2 of what's going to be a 4-part series, why Western society is collapsing. Point number 4, the dream of massive success is not being realized. A lot of people are looking at what used to be called the American dream. I don't know if people even still use that phrase. At least I don't think they're using it as much as they used to, even if it's still being used. And now, for many people, that dream is turning into a nightmare. The American nightmare, not getting the things that you want and things actually being a lot worse than maybe you thought they would be. The concept of this American dream predates my existence. People were talking about this since probably even before my parents were born. But I do remember it being talked about over the years by many people, being in the concept of owning a home, having a car, taking care of and raising your family, the potential of upward mobility, all happening within one lifetime. That was what the American dream was, that you could start down at the bottom, and by the time you retire or die and pass what you've done on to your next generation, you have changed the trajectory of your family and of your dynasty. And you could do that within one lifetime in America, whereas in other parts of the world, this option wasn't even available depending on where you started. And that was the American dream. Now, I believe that potential does still exist. At the same time, I believe it has become harder and harder for many people to reach it, as factors like what I explained back on that series in the middle class, episode 3143. As I started talking about that, why the middle class is disappearing, I believe that many factors are causing people to be squeezed out of the potential that they thought they had by virtue of being an American citizen, or by being in America, period. The big reason why America is because it was always known as the land of opportunity. I think people still see it that way. I still believe America has the most opportunity. You have the most potential to make something out of nothing in America as opposed to any other place in the world. And you have the most freedom to do so in America, and the most options to do so. You can come here as a nobody with pretty much nothing other than the clothes on your back, and you become a somebody who has a whole lot of something. And not only for yourself, but also for others. Unfortunately, many people are seeing that that dream is not as possible for them as it used to be back in the day. I think many people are looking at that American dream and saying, well, hey, it used to be possible to do that based on circumstances back then, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago. But the circumstances I'm dealing with right now, where I'm drowning in debt and my costs keep going up and my money is worth less, and I don't like what the government is doing, and things just everything that changes is only changing for the worse and not changing for the better. A lot of people are looking at this situation as an impossible one, as how and when and where is this going to actually get better? When am I going to get the opportunity to reach this dream? Because it used to be you could be the average person in the middle class with a respectable job, but it wasn't anything spectacular about it, and not even anything spectacular about the money. But with the money you made from that job, as long as you were responsible for it, the money you made from that average job, as long as you were responsible with it, there's a lot of things you could do for yourself and your family within one lifetime. These days, that same average person with an average but respectable job does not have the same potential, upward mobile potential in one lifetime that a person had 50, 60 years ago in one lifetime with the exact same situation. It was very possible, let's say when my grandparents were in their prime working years, It was less possible when my parents were in their prime working years. And it looks to be, for many people, impossible for people in their prime working years right now. Now, that is not to say that it's impossible for everybody. It depends on what you're doing, what lane you pick, and how you play the cards that you've been dealt. And I am still on the accountability tip of this being a thing, but that's not the topic here today. The topic here today is why Western society is collapsing. And society means the masses of people. It doesn't mean any one individual. Any one of you individually, you want to make sure you rise to the top and get to the top 2% of what you're doing. You're in the right place and listen to the right person, and we have the right tools to help you with it. What I'm talking about here today is the masses of people as a whole. As a whole, not everybody has the same opportunity as they had back then. My father's father, my grandfather, for example, he worked for a company called the Container Company of America. And I only know this because when my grandfather passed away, I was only maybe 10 or 11 years of age. So I never really had any deep conversations with him. But I remember when he passed away and I went to the funeral, there was that little brochure to hand out for the person. And in there was his, I guess you call his biography or his obituary. And in there, it mentioned that that's where he worked. And I believe he spent most of his working years working at that company. I don't know what he was doing, but knowing what I do remember about my grandfather, he was probably just a line worker, a factory worker working on the assembly line or whatever the role was there. I don't think he was an executive or a management guy. And he earned enough money through doing that and whatever else he had done or did to take care of a family. And my dad had 5 brothers and sisters, in addition to himself, and a wife. And they had a home and they were doing what they were doing. They lived how they lived. And my grandmother, I believe, was raising the kids. I don't believe she was working, not full time, not career wise. Maybe she did some work. I remember her working some jobs later on after my grandfather was gone or close to it. But she wasn't some career person. All right, she was at home with the kids. The point being that you had a chance for upward mobility on one income back then with a bunch of mouths to feed. You could do that then. When my parents were in their prime working years, they could not have done that. And you damn sure can't do it now. That's the point that I'm making. Many people are not able to reach this dream this way anymore. Again, it's not as important as the fact that whether it's true or not that people can reach it. As I said, those of you listening to this, you can reach it if you take certain steps. But what do the masses of people believe? Masses of people believe that this is not possible anymore. And that's the reason why society is collapsing. Because when people have negative energy about the possibilities and the prospects for the future, that negativity can make the entire society start going downward. That's what we're talking about here in this series. Point number 5. Today's topic, once again, is why Western society is collapsing. Political corruption and distrust in the government. I personally am on the record, and will go further on the record in future episodes, of not being a fan of the governmental system here in the United States of America. I like the fact that we had a system of checks and balances. I like the fact that we have a democratic voting process. There are many parts of what the government is doing that I'm not a fan of, that I've talked about in the past. I'm going to talk about more in the future. One of them is the excessive levels of bureaucracy. Levels of bureaucracy just means layers and layers of human beings who have a say in certain things and certain outcomes and certain processes, not because they necessarily are needed, but because the system is set up in such a way, it has become so bloated that people become quote unquote needed even when they're not actually needed, if that makes any sense. And I talk extensively about how the government is massively inefficient, how it is highly bureaucratic, and people simply do not trust it and do not trust most of the people who work within it. One of the reasons why I would never get into politics, I had people tell me, Dre, you should get into politics. You'd be a good politician. I think I would be a good politician if we had a clean system. We don't have a clean system. So to operate in an unclean system, you had to become an unclean person. You had to do as the Romans do if you want to survive in Rome. And I don't want to become an unclean person. What I mean by that is you have to continually lie to be successful in politics in America. Because if you told people the actual truth, which involves not only what they get, the benefits, but also the trade-offs of those benefits, nobody would vote for you. Nobody would donate money to your campaign, and your career would be pretty much over before it even started. And I like to tell people the trade-offs of everything. Even if I'm telling you something that you like, I want to tell you what it's going to cost you to get it. And most people don't want to hear that. And they're damn sure not going to go vote for someone who does that, because if I was to do that, all my opponent has to do is not do that, and they're going to beat me by default. So I can never be successful in politics. And this is the way our system is set up. It's not because the people who get into politics are necessarily nasty people. It's because they quickly will understand as soon as you try to get in, if you don't play the game this way, you ain't winning. I understand that. I'm not even in politics. So the government is massively inefficient. And this is the reason why it's actually good that Mr. Elon Musk is in there trying to create efficiencies. But you look at that, the bureaucracy in the government is reflected in the pushback against Elon Musk. Well, everybody agrees the government's not efficient and the government's not effective with the resources that it has. As soon as someone comes along trying to make it more efficient and effective, immediately he gets a ton of pushback from the other side politically, not necessarily because what he's doing is anything that he's doing is wrong necessarily, is because they are on a certain side politically, and politics demand, current politics, the way they're currently designed, demands that they find fault with this and trash everything that he does simply because he's on one political side and they're on the other side. So all the logical explanations you hear for why people are pushing back against Elon Musk are not logical about, they're not logically about the things that he's doing. What they're actually about is that I'm on this side, he's on that side. We must go against everything he does, regardless of what it is. And if we need to frame it in a negative way, dishonestly, to push that idea, we will do it. That's how politics work in America. That's partisan politics. And it's the reason why I wouldn't get in it, because I essentially be playing a role. I would essentially be acting. I couldn't tell you the truth there, because I would have to act based on what side I'm on. If I'm on a Republican side, I can't come out and say, hey, these things about what the Democrats are doing are actually good, but these things I'm against. You couldn't come out and say that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to hear it. The voters don't want to hear it. Your donors don't want to hear it. And your fellow Republicans don't want to hear it. And they'll make sure that you get out of there and get kicked out and go back to your job work on your game university. You come in there talking that nonsense. Relative to them is nonsense. Again, so Donald Trump coming into an office and his team, I believe it is a step in the right direction, especially compared to the alternative, which would have been Kamala Harris as president. I shudder to consider the thought. The problem is presidents only get 4-year terms and Donald Trump can't get another one. So he only gets 4 years and he's already on the clock. So who or what comes after him is anyone's guess. And they pretty much, depending on who it is, especially if they're from the political left, if the political left takes back the White House, especially if they take over the Congress as well, they try to undo every single thing he's going to do during this last term. Do you understand that? And this is the problem. This is a fundamental problem with the government, is that it's highly partisan now, to where everyone is just playing the game based on what their side needs to do to be in opposition of the other side. They're not doing it to serve you or me. They're doing it to serve each other or to serve themselves or go against each other. So when I talked about Doge and Elon Musk, they're starting to expose some of the corruption that many of us, already had a feeling was going on, but we couldn't quite explain it. Now he's starting to show it to us. He's starting to solve that problem, Elon and his team. Now that solving that problem may create new problems, because now it's going to expose people who don't want to get exposed. And the collateral damage in this process of all this political back and forth is the everyday person. The everyday person is the one who is losing in this process, because this is just one side of the political game against the other side of the political game. And they're using us as pawns in the situation. We are not really players in this game. They're playing against each other. It's like you're watching a football game, the Buffalo Bills against the Kansas City Chiefs. You're watching the game. You may cheer for one side or the other, but you ain't really in the game. You're just watching the game. Whoever wins, wins. Whoever loses, loses. You have no say in the outcome. You're just a spectator paying for a ticket. The collateral damage in this process is the everyday citizen. On top of the fact that governmental politics was never designed to be a full-time job. It's supposed to be a volunteer position, something you did on the weekends, or similar to any of you have been or know anything about being on the board of directors at a company. You show up maybe once a quarter, you have a little meeting, you make the decisions that need to be made, then everybody goes back home and does their regular business. And then you come meet on the board every once in a while to make important decisions, then everybody goes back to their regular life. It was never supposed to be you just sit there on the board as a full-time job forever and do nothing but make up jobs to do because you ain't got nothing else to do. That's what the government has become. And that's the reason why we don't trust politicians. The only organization, the only entity in America that is less trusted than Congress right now, the legislature, is the mainstream media. And that's by poll survey results. So all of this contributes to the bigger problem that we're discussing here. Moving on to point number 6. Today's topic, once again, is why Western society is collapsing. Number 6, mass immigration without forced assimilation. In episode 3214, I did a 5-part series on how America does immigration wrong. It's not that I'm against the concept of immigration. I have a whole lot of people close to me and friends of mine and people I do business with who are indeed immigrants. They're immigrants who listen to this show, I'm pretty sure. And what I'm saying is immigration without forced assimilation. That's the key. What does forced assimilation mean? Forced assimilation means if you're going to come into our space, you as an outsider, there are certain rules and parameters and standards you must abide by, and certain things you must follow, and certain boxes you must check. And if you don't do that, you cannot come here and or you cannot stay here. That's forced assimilation. If If you come here are the rules you got to follow. I'll give you an example. My first job out of college was working at Foot Locker. And the way it worked at Foot Locker is somehow Foot Locker had decided, I don't know if they had a real science behind this, but I'm assuming that they did, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Their whole thing was you always want to make every order what they called a multiple, quote unquote. It's big to get a multiple. What does a multiple mean? It means that if someone comes in and buys a pair of shoes, which is what we sold at Foot Locker, you always wanted them to get at least one other item in that transaction. So you didn't want single transactions where someone bought just one product and nothing else. You wanted multiple transactions where someone would buy not only the shoes, but also something else, like some shoe cleaner for $5, or some socks, or a t-shirt, or a hoodie. Or you wanted them to buy at least two things in every order. That was called a multiple. So your managers, and I was one of the managers, they would stress this to employees. So if an employee was walking the floor and they're talking to a customer and the customer wants to buy some sneakers, the manager might whisper in the ear of the employee while they're on their way to ringing up the order, hey, try to make it a multiple. Try to sell them some of the waterproofer for their Timberland boots, or some shoe polish, or some white, like the white polisher for their sneakers, their Air Force Ones that they're going to buy, whatever it is. Make it a multiple, make it a multiple. And if you were an employee, because we got a discount, I think our normal discount was either 30 or 40%. And then when we had employee, what was it called? Like employee appreciation weekend, something like that, then our discount was bumped up temporarily to 50%. And even for us as employees, if we made a purchase of anything, of course, we had to scan it through the register and all that stuff, so it would show up on the receipts. Every purchase that we made as employees had to be a multiple. It was like a requirement. The manager would make a requirement. If you buy something on your employee discount, it must be a multiple. You cannot just buy one thing. It was a rule. And I'm bringing all that up to tell you the story. Once I went to, excuse me, I'm from Philadelphia, PA. So I worked at a Foot Locker that was in this place called Granite Run Mall, which I believe got torn down and renovated. I think it's open again. And where I'm from is actually Mount Airy, which is the northwestern part of the city, right next to Germantown, which many people have heard of. We call it Uptown, that whole area. But anyway, I went to the Foot Locker at Cheltenham Mall once because a pair of Jordan 13s had come out as a re-release of Jordan 13s. And I never had the original Jordan 13s, so now I had some money, I'm going to buy the Jordan 13s. Now, my store did not have the Jordan 13s in my size, but the Cheltenham Mall store had them. So I called the store and said to the gentleman working there, hey, I work at a different Foot Locker. I'm going to come up there and buy a pair of Jordan 13s in a size 13. Can you hold a pair for me? He said, sure. I go up there and I tell him who I am, and they have the pair for me. And he said, where's your multiple? That's what he said. He said, where's your multiple? He didn't say, could you please make this a multiple? He said, hey, do you want to get something else? He said, where is your multiple? As if, again, he understood that I should understand that this has to be a multiple just because I'm using my employee discount. And I went and bought, I don't know what I bought, something that cost them $2 just to make sure they got their multiple so I could get my pair of sneakers. The point is, that's a form of, it's an example of what I'm referring to here when I say forced assimilation. That if someone's going to come into your space, they have to follow a rule that you are setting. And whether you want to call it arbitrary or not, call it whatever you want. Just understand these are the rules. And if you're going to come in here and stay here, you got to follow the rules. So you in or you out. And when it comes to immigration, we are not forcing assimilation on people. And you can't force assimilation on people if you're letting them get quote unquote legal status without making them have to jump through any hoops, which is what the Biden-Harris administration was doing for 3.5 years until it started getting called out on them for the campaign, let's see, what do we call it? During the campaign cycle against them. And all of a sudden they had a quote unquote bipartisan border bill. It's bullshit. They didn't want to do that. And had Harris won that election, they would have went right back to doing the same thing they were doing immigration-wise that they were doing before it got called out and was being used against them politically. The point is, you can't force assimilation when you have no standards, no rules, no process. And this is the issue. And even though Trump is in there now, and they are simply enforcing the laws that already existed, they didn't create any new laws. All Trump is doing is saying, just enforce the laws we already got. Harris and Biden weren't doing it. Just enforce the laws we already got, and it's going to cut immigration by a whole lot. Magic formula, just enforce the law. Wow. And the issue is when you don't force assimilation, it leads to cultural clashes, because you got people coming from other cultures and just bringing whatever they want to bring into our space and no one's checking them on it. Economic strain because they are using resources and may not be paying taxes on their use. Loss of national identity. Now, I've used this example before. If you have a glass of milk and you start pouring water into the glass, eventually it's no longer milk and it also ain't water. What is it? We don't know. All right, think about that with America. If America's a glass of milk, you just keep pouring water into it, well, it's going to not be milk anymore. And it also isn't water. It's some other thing we don't have a name for. So you lose that identity. I talked about this in depth again in episode number 3214. If you're allowing people to immigrate into any group, they should be forced to assimilate by making sure they understand the norms, rules, the standards, and the expectations that they are stepping into. This is exactly what happens when you get hired for a job. When you hire for a job, what's the first thing they send you to do? They send you to training. Your training might be one day. If you're working somewhere like a McDonald's or a Wendy's, your training might be 2 or 3 weeks or a month long, depending on the type of work that you're doing and depending on what kind of work you're expected to do. But the whole point is everyone goes through some form of assimilation training when you step into a new entity. It's a normal thing to do. If I hire a new person to work for me, first thing I'm going to do is train them. I made the mistake of hiring someone thinking that they already had all the skill and didn't train them, and they ended up sucking and I had to fire them. And it wasn't even their fault. It was my fault because I skipped my process of assimilation. You must assimilate anybody new into any space. And if you don't do that, you're going to start losing what your space used to be about. So if people are not being forced to assimilate and they're just stepping into spaces, it becomes a free-for-all. They just do what they want to do. They ain't got nothing else to do. They just do what they want. And there's nowhere in the world other than the United States of America where this is allowed to happen. And increasingly, there are a few other countries who are starting to feel the pain of this, and hopefully they're starting to regret the error in their ways, such as the United Kingdom. And if you know anything that's going on over there, knows this kind of thing is happening. They're allowing immigrants to come in, not checking them, not forcing them to assimilate, not finding out who they are, where they're from, or what their intentions are in the country. They're wreaking havoc on the country, and the citizens are afraid to say anything about it because you look like a bad person if you're against immigration. See, this is the bullshit. And this is what I put up in the face of the government. This is not acceptable and it's not okay. And this is the reason why Western society is collapsing. Let's recap today's class. This is part 2 of our ongoing 4-part series. Number 4, dream of massive success not being realized. What used to be called the American dream for some people has become the American nightmare. Point number 5, political corruption and distrust in the government. Government was never designed to be a full-time job. It was a volunteer position like coaching your kids' youth soccer games on the weekends. Now people are making full-time careers out of it, which means they always have a vested interest in something other than serving the people because you have given them that interest by giving them the incentive of having a career in politics, which means sometimes they may make a decision that favors their career over favoring the people. And number 6, mass immigration without forced assimilation. All right, this is causing all kinds of chaos. And the only reason the masses of people are accepting this is because you've been psyoped into believing that you should accept any immigrant because we're supposed to be, quote unquote, a land of immigrants. Yes, we are a land of immigrants, but that doesn't mean that immigrant means we just let anybody in here to do anything that they want and don't hold them to a standard. There are 2 different ways to look at that. Actually, there's more than 2 different ways to look at it, but I'm giving you the one that should be being used and is not being used. It hasn't been used, at least a lot up until this point, but we'll see what the current administration does. All that said, everybody, tomorrow we will get into part 3 of this series. Between now and then, workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work with me directly, have me as your direct coach, and we got a lot of goodies coming over there. Probably this week that I'm recording this. By the time you hear this, they're already being used, they're already being deployed and operated. You better catch up. Work on your game. Dre, all